In this part of the lecture, we'll briefly explore how internet sensors sometimes not only actively send traffic to launch denial of service attacks, but sometimes send so-called active probes to discover existing systems on the internet, such as circumvention systems, so that they can actively block those systems. In this part of the lecture, we'll explore specifically how a sensor implemented this kind of discovery mechanism for a service called Tor, which we'll be exploring in subsequent lectures. But for now, you can just think about Tor as any kind of system that's being used to circumvent censorship. And we'll see how a sensor can actively probe the internet to discover where that circumvention system is so that it can actively block access to that service. So if we assume that two clients that are trying to communicate are doing so over an encrypted tunnel, a sensor might have some difficulty understanding exactly what application corresponds to that traffic exchange. But depending on what the initial handshake of that encrypted connection is, some of the metadata or information in that handshake might reveal things about what that application might be. For example, might observe the cipher list in the so-called TLS handshake and surmise that the client in China and the server in Germany are trying to set up a connection through the Tor system, or perhaps some other circumvention system. In this case, the sensor is guessing that maybe the client is trying to set up a connection to the circumvention system Tor. And so to validate that guess, a sensor might use an active probing system to try to initiate a handshake to that server that it sees the client talking to. And depending on the response it gets back, it might confirm that indeed that server in Germany is part of a circumvention system so that it can subsequently block access to that service. A study that we performed in 2015 suggests that the infrastructure that China is using to probe the Tor network to discover proxies or relays that help clients inside the country circumvent censorship is quite substantial. Some leakage of connection state information from our measurement study indicated that these probes coming from the Great Firewall are controlled by some centralized entity, but it's still unclear how that central entity controls the probes. There are a number of possibilities, including through a proxy network or maybe even an off-path device in the ISP's data center. It's clear from this research and others that there is a collection of protocols that are both probed and blocked, some of which you can see here. But it's been some time since a formal study has been conducted, and so it's likely that there are additional protocols and applications that could be added to this particular list. Needless to say, there's an important takeaway lesson here from this part of the lecture, which is that sensors sometimes actively scan the internet to identify services that they can subsequently censor. And they do so to discover circumvention technologies so that they can block access to those technologies and services. Past research, ours and others, has explored the nature of this active in the context of certain circumvention systems such as Tor. And whether this type of probing applies to other systems, like specific VPNs or other services, is less well understood, but we can only assume that this type of probing and active interference is likely and prevalent.